They said a ghost rode into Copper Ridge that day, but he was no spirit. He was flesh and bone, carved from the desert itself. He rode a paint horse that looked like a storm cloud and a sunset stitched together, and he moved with a silence that made the dusty town hold its breath. Every shopkeeper stopped sweeping. Every gambler looked up from his cards. They saw the hard lines of his face, the sun-baked bronze of his skin, and the honey-colored eyes that missed nothing. They saw the rifle in his scabbard and the knife on his hip, and they whispered a name they'd only heard in fearful rumors around crackling fires, the Omega. They didn't know what it meant, only that it meant an ending. But inside the Hartwell boarding house, a place where hope was a four-letter word, a 22-year-old girl named Lily O'Connor didn't see a ghost. She was hanging laundry in the backyard, her arms a tapestry of purple and blue bruises, a living testament to the cruelty of the woman who owned her. Her fiery red hair was a tangled mess, and her emerald eyes, once bright with life, were clouded with the dullness of survival. 3 years she'd been here. 3 years since her parents' wagon went off the road, leaving her an orphan at the mercy of Martha Hartwell. Martha, a woman whose heart was as barren as the Arizona dust. Lily heard the hoofbeats slow, the sound different from the usual clatter of prospectors and drunks. This was measured, confident, dangerous. She peered around a flapping white sheet and saw him, the Apache warrior, the Omega, and for a single heart-stopping moment, his gaze locked onto hers from across the street. It wasn't the leering look of the boarders or the pitying stare of the townswomen. It was something else. A flicker of recognition, as if he saw past the dirt and the bruises, right into the cage where her soul was kept. A jolt went through her, sharp and electric. It wasn't fear. It was something she hadn't felt in 1,000 days. Hope. And then a voice like shattered glass sliced through the air. "Lily, get in here, you worthless creature! These floors won't scrub themselves." The spell was broken. When she looked back, the rider was gone. A mirage in the heat. But the memory of those eyes stayed with her. A single burning coal in the cold ash of her life. She didn't know it yet, but that one look had just lit a fuse, and the explosion was going to burn Copper Ridge to the ground. The next morning the sun rose with a promise of blistering heat, and Martha Hartwell rose with a promise of fresh pain. Lily was on her hands and knees scrubbing the kitchen floor when the first kick landed in her ribs. It wasn't for spilling anything or being too slow. It was just for being alive. "Look at you," Martha spat, her face a mask of pinched fury. "Useless. Just like your mother. Thought her beauty would save her, too." Lily bit her tongue until she tasted blood. She never talked back. Talking back meant the belt, or the closet, or no food for 2 days. Survival was a simple, brutal equation of silence equals less pain. She focused on the grime under her fingernails, on the scent of lye soap and rancid bacon grease. She focused on anything but the gnawing hunger in her belly. Around her neck, hidden beneath the collar of her threadbare dress, was the only thing she had left of her parents, a small silver locket. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. Martha's eyes narrowed, catching a glint of the chain. "What's that you got there, girl?" she snarled, her hand shooting out like a snake. She ripped the locket from Lily's neck, the delicate chain snapping. "No!" The word burst out of Lily, a raw, desperate cry. Martha's eyes lit up with a cruel glee. She loved breaking things, especially things people loved. She held the locket in her palm, her thumb rubbing over the strange, swirling symbol etched on its surface. "Give it back," Lily whispered, pushing herself to her feet. "Or what?" Martha sneered. "You'll cry? You'll beg? I own you, girl. Everything you are, everything you have. It's mine." She started to close her fist, ready to crush the one precious thing Lily had left in the world. But then a knock echoed through the house. Firm, polite. 3 measured raps that cut through the tension like a razor. Martha froze, her face contorting as she shifted from tormentor to business owner. She shoved the locket into her apron pocket and smoothed her hair. "Stay here," she hissed at Lily, "and if you make a sound, you'll be eating this floor for a week." Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. All she could think about was the locket in that woman's pocket. the last piece of her mother. Martha opened the front door a crack, her fake sugary smile plastered on her face. And standing on her porch, tall and imposing against the morning sun, was him, the Apache warrior, the Omega. His honey-colored eyes took in the scene in an instant. The barely opened door, the woman's false smile, and just over her shoulder, he saw Lily, her face pale, her eyes wide with a desperate plea. "Ma'am," his voice was deep, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "I'm looking for a room, just for the night." Martha's smile tightened. "Sorry, we're full up." It was a blatant lie. 2 rooms sat empty upstairs, but Martha Hartwell didn't rent to his kind. "I can pay," he said, his voice quiet. "Silver." Greed warred with prejudice on Martha's face. Lily could see the gears turning, but the hate won. "I said we're full," she snapped, starting to close the door. That's when Lily did it. She broke the rule. The one rule that kept her safe, or at least less hurt. She spoke. "Room 7 is empty," she said, her voice a trembling whisper. "And room 4. The silence that followed was absolute. Martha turned slowly, her face a thundercloud of disbelief and rage. The slap was so fast Lily didn't even see it coming. It was a crack of sound that sent her stumbling back, the side of her face exploding in pain. But she kept her eyes on the man in the doorway. He hadn't moved, but something in him had changed. The polite traveler was gone. His stillness was terrifying. His eyes, fixed on the red handprint blooming on Lily's cheek, had gone from honey to ice. "Don't you ever contradict me," Martha hissed, raising her hand again. The warrior moved. Not fast, not aggressive. He just took one step forward, planting himself in the doorway. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His presence was a physical barrier, a promise of violence held in perfect, terrifying check. Martha's hand froze in midair. "Ma'am," he said, and the word was no longer polite. It was a warning, a razor's edge. "I believe I'll take room 7. He tossed 2 heavy silver coins onto the hall table. They landed with a sound that was loud as a gunshot in the dead quiet of the house. It was more than twice the price of a room. It wasn't a payment. It was a claim. Martha, for the first time in 3 years, looked afraid. She stared at the silver, then at the man, then back at Lily, her eyes promising a reckoning later. She nodded stiffly. "Room 7, she gritted out. "Up the stairs. First door on the left." As he walked past, he paused for a fraction of a second beside Lily. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. She could feel the heat coming off him, the scent of sage and desert dust, and something wild and free. His eyes met hers, and in them, she saw a cold, burning fury, a fury on her behalf. Then he was gone, his footsteps silent on the stairs. Lily stood there, her cheek on fire, her heart a frantic drum. She had defied Martha. She had spoken out, and a complete stranger had defended her. She had no idea that she hadn't just secured him a room. She had just chosen a side in a war she didn't even know was being fought. And in Copper Ridge, choosing the wrong side was a death sentence. The day passed in a haze of fear and anticipation. Martha didn't beat her again. Instead, she subjected Lily to a worse kind of torture, the silent, simmering promise of future pain. Every time she passed, Martha would pat the apron pocket where the locket was hidden, a cruel little smile on her lips. Lily's skin crawled. She worked on autopilot, her mind replaying the morning's events. The warrior's cold anger, the weight of his stare, the way he'd made Martha Hartwell, the tyrant of her world, back down. She didn't even know his name. Late in the afternoon, Martha sent her to the well in the backyard. It was a brief reprieve, a few moments alone under the vast open sky. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the clouds in streaks of orange and purple. She was hauling up a heavy wooden bucket when a shadow fell over her. She flinched, expecting Martha or one of the leering boarders. But it was him. He moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. Up close, he was even more intimidating. The setting sun caught the sharp angles of his face, the intensity in his eyes. "That took courage," he said, his voice softer now. Lily ducked her head, unused to kindness. "It was stupid." "No," he said firmly. It was right. There's a difference. He paused, studying her face. The woman? She does that often? Lily just nodded, not trusting her voice. My name is Kane, he said. Lily finally looked up, meeting his gaze. Lily O'Connor. Lily O'Connor, he repeated as if tasting the name. His eyes flickered down to her neck, to the faint red line where the chain had been. She took something from you. It wasn't a question. Tears pricked Lily's eyes. She hated crying, hated showing weakness. But the simple act of him noticing threatened to undo her. A locket, she whispered. It was my mother's. Kane's jaw tightened. A muscle flexed. A small, telltale sign of the anger he kept leashed just beneath the surface. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stared out at the desert horizon. Some things, he said finally, his voice a low growl, are not meant to be caged, not souls, not memories. He looked back at her, and his eyes were burning with a fierce light. If you ever need help, you ask. The promise hung in the air between them, heavy and real. It was a lifeline, a whisper of a possibility so foreign she could barely comprehend it. Before she could answer, the back door creaked open. Martha's silhouette was framed against the lamplight from the kitchen. Get that water in here, girl. Now! Kane gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement, and melted back into the shadows as quickly as he'd appeared. Lily hurried back inside, her heart a tangled mess of terror and a wild, unfamiliar hope. That night, she lay on her thin cot in the stuffy storage closet she called a room, listening to the sounds of the house settle. She heard the boarders stumble up to their rooms, drunk and loud. She heard Martha lock the doors. And then she heard something else, a faint creak of floorboards from the hallway. Not the heavy, clumsy tread of a boarder. This was light, silent, purposeful. The creaking stopped outside her door. Lily's blood ran cold. She held her breath, listening. A sliver of paper was pushed under her door. She waited until the footsteps faded away, down the stairs and out the front door, the lock clicking softly behind them. With trembling hands, she crawled across the floor and picked up the folded paper. She opened it. Inside wasn't a note. It was her locket, and wrapped around it was a single dark eagle feather. She stared at it, her mind reeling. He'd gone into Martha's room. He'd taken it back for her. The risk, the audacity of it. He had faced down the monster in her house and won, all without a single word. She clutched the locket to her chest, the cool metal a comfort against her skin. But as the relief washed over her, it was replaced by a new, chilling thought. If he could move through this house like a ghost, getting past locked doors to retrieve a locket from a sleeping tyrant, what else could he do? Who was this man? The name the townspeople whispered came back to her. The Omega. The end. And she realized with a jolt of fear that by accepting this kindness, by taking back the locket, she had tied her fate to his. She had stepped into his story, and she had a terrible feeling that his story was one written in blood. The storm broke just before dawn. Lily was startled awake not by Martha's shouting, but by the sound of splintering wood and a man's scream of pain. She scrambled out of her cot, her heart hammering. The scream had come from downstairs. It was followed by a crash, the sound of a body hitting a table. Then came Martha's voice, high and shrieking, with a mix of rage and terror. Get out! Get out of my house, you savage! Lily crept to her door and pressed her ear against it. She could hear a man groaning. Another voice, oily and familiar, belonged to Mr. Peterson, the traveling salesman with wandering hands. I told you, Martha, Peterson wheezed. I saw him sneaking around last night. He's a thief, a no-good irk. The sound was cut off by a sickening thud. Then Kane's voice, cold as a winter night. You'll want to stop talking now. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. He was still here. She'd thought he'd left after returning her locket. What was happening? She had to see. Cautiously, she opened her door a crack and peered down the stairwell. The scene in the entry hall was chaos. Mr. Peterson was slumped against the wall, clutching his stomach, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. A chair was overturned. A lamp was shattered on the floor. Martha Hartwell stood near the kitchen doorway, her face pale, holding a heavy cast-iron skillet like a weapon, and in the center of it all stood Kane. He was perfectly calm, not even breathing hard. He looked from Peterson to Martha, his expression unreadable. I was just leaving, Kane said, his voice deceptively mild. This man decided to block my path. He seemed to think I had something of his. You were in my room, Martha shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at him. You stole from me. Kane's eyes narrowed slightly. I took back what was stolen from a child, he corrected her, his gaze flicking up the stairs, meeting Lily's for a split second. There's a difference. The unspoken message was clear. He knew she was watching. Mr. Peterson, seeing his opportunity, decided to be a hero. With a roar, he launched himself at Kane from the side. It was a fatal mistake. Kane moved with a blur of speed that defied belief. He didn't even seem to try. He sidestepped, his arms shot out, and Peterson went flying, crashing into the coat rack and crumpling to the floor in a heap, unconscious. Martha let out a small scream. Now, Kane said, turning his full attention to her, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. We were having a conversation. He took a step towards her. Martha swung the heavy skillet wildly. Kane caught her wrist in an iron grip, stopping the blow effortlessly. The skillet clattered to the floor. You hurt the girl again, Kane said, his voice low and menacing. And what happened to him will feel like a tickle. Do you understand me? Martha, her face white with terror, could only nod, her eyes wide. It was then that the front door burst open. Sheriff Brody stood there, a portly man with a sweaty face and a shotgun in his hands. Behind him were two deputies. All right, Kane, the sheriff said, his voice trying for forceful but coming out shaky. That's enough. You're under arrest for assault. Kane didn't even look at him. He just released Martha's wrist, pushing her back gently. This doesn't concern you, Brody, Kane said calmly. The hell it doesn't, Brody blustered, gesturing with the shotgun. You can't just come into my town and beat up citizens. Kane finally turned to face him, and a slow, cold smile touched his lips. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator. Your town? Kane said softly. That's funny. I was under the impression this town belonged to Silas Croft. The sheriff's face went slack. The color drained from his cheeks. Even his deputies shifted nervously. The name hung in the air like a death sentence. Lily, watching from the stairs, felt a chill run down her spine. She'd heard that name before, whispered in fear. Silas Croft, the man who owned the mine, the saloon, the bank. The man who owned everything, including, it seemed, the law. I don't know what you're talking about, Brody stammered. Don't you? Kane took a step toward the sheriff, who instinctively took a step back. Tell Croft the Omega has come for what he stole, and I'm not leaving without it. He brushed past the stunned lawmen as if they were children and strode out the front door into the dawn light. The sheriff didn't try to stop him. Nobody did. Lily was left staring down at the wreckage. Peterson unconscious on the floor. Martha trembling against the wall, and a sheriff who was clearly terrified of a name. She had thought this was about her, about a stolen locket and a moment of kindness. She was wrong. So wrong. This was something much bigger. She and her locket were just a tiny piece in a game she couldn't begin to understand. A game played by powerful men like Silas Croft and hunted by dangerous men like Kane. Martha's eyes, full of venom and fear, shot up to meet hers. This is your fault, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. You brought him here. You brought this curse on my house. Lily knew what was coming. Now that Kane was gone, Martha's terror would curdle back into rage, and that rage would be unleashed on the only person she could hurt. Her. Lily didn't hesitate. She turned and fled back to her room, her mind racing. Kane's words echoed in her ears. If you ever need help, you ask. She looked out her small, cracked window. Kane was untying his paint horse from the post outside. He was leaving. This was her last chance. Her only chance. She couldn't stay here. Not now. Martha would kill her. Making a decision that would change the course of her entire life, Lily took a deep breath, kicked out the cracked window pane, and scrambled onto the low porch roof. She didn't have any things to pack. She didn't have anywhere to go. All she had was a desperate, terrifying hope. She jumped the 10 feet to the ground, landing hard in the dusty alley. Cain heard the sound and turned, his hand instantly going to the knife on his hip. He saw her, standing there in her threadbare dress, wild-eyed and breathing hard. "Take me with you," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Cain's face was grim. He looked back at the boarding house, then at her. He saw the terror in her eyes and the fierce determination behind it. "My road is not a safe one, Lily," he said quietly. "Safer than staying here," she replied, her voice shaking but firm. "Please." For a long moment he studied her. She could see the conflict in his eyes. He was a man on a mission, a dangerous mission. A girl would be a liability, a weakness. But then his eyes dropped to the locket she was clutching in her hand, and something in his expression shifted. A flicker of understanding, of destiny. He didn't smile, but the hardness in his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. Without another word, he swung himself up onto his horse. Then he reached down a hand to her. "The desert doesn't give second chances," he said, his voice a low warning. "Are you sure?" She looked at his outstretched hand. Then she looked back at the house that had been her prison. She could already hear Martha screaming her name. It wasn't a choice between good and bad. It was a choice between a slow death and a dangerous life. "I'm sure," she said. She took his hand. His grip was strong, calloused and warm. He pulled her up onto the horse behind him with effortless strength. She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against the hard muscle of his back. She could feel the steady beat of his heart. He spurred the horse and they moved, not at a run, but at a steady, ground-eating pace down the main street. The people of Copper Ridge stared as they passed. They saw the Apache warrior and the bruised girl with the fiery red hair, riding out of town together into the rising sun. Lily didn't look back. She was terrified. She was riding into the unknown with a man who was more myth than human, a man with secrets and enemies she couldn't imagine. But for the first time in 3 years, she was free. She had no idea they were being watched. From the window of the sheriff's office, Brody lowered a spyglass, his face slick with sweat. He turned to a man sitting in the shadows behind him. "It's him," Brody said, his voice shaking. "And he's got the girl." The man in the shadows leaned forward, the light catching the cruel line of his mouth and a jagged scar that ran down his cheek. It was Silas Croft's chief enforcer, a man they called Jedediah. "Well now," Jedediah said, a slow, ugly smile spreading across his face. "Isn't that interesting? The Omega and the orphan. It seems our little loose ends are tying themselves together." He stood up, buckling on a gun belt with 2 holsters. "Get a posse together, Sheriff," Jedediah ordered. "I want them found. I want the man dead." He paused, his eyes gleaming with a cold light. "But bring me the girl, and that locket she's wearing. Mr. Croft will want to have a word with her before she dies." The desert was a living thing. During the day, it was a furnace, trying to cook the life out of you. At night, it was a frozen wasteland, the cold seeping into your bones. It was filled with things that could bite, sting, or kill you. And it was the most beautiful place Lily had ever seen. For 2 days, they rode east, into the harsh, rocky wilderness. Cain pushed them hard, stopping only for brief rests. He was a man who knew the land, reading it like a book. He found water in places that looked barren, led them through canyons that seemed like dead ends. He was quiet, speaking only when necessary. He taught her how to ride the gentle mare he'd acquired for her in a silent transaction at the edge of town. He showed her which plants were safe to eat and how to build a fire that gave off little smoke. Lily learned quickly. The same resilience that had helped her survive Martha's abuse now helped her survive the desert. She felt her body growing stronger, the pain of the past starting to feel distant, like a bad dream. On the second night, as they sat by a small, crackling fire, the star-dusted sky, a vast canopy above them, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why are they calling you the Omega?" Cain stared into the flames, his face a mask of shadows and light. For a long time, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Among my people," he said at last, his voice low, "the Alpha is the beginning, the leader, the one who creates. The Omega is the one who ends things, the one sent to balance a debt that has been left unpaid." "A debt?" Lily asked. "A blood debt," he said, and the words were cold and hard as stone. He looked at her, his honey eyes intense. The man I'm hunting, Silas Croft, he didn't just build his empire on rock and silver. He built it on the bones of my people. He told her a story then, a story of a treaty broken, of a sacred valley stolen. He told her of a wise elder, his mentor, who had tried to fight Croft with words and laws, and who had been murdered for his trouble. Croft didn't just kill him, Kane said, his voice thick with a rage that was years old. He and his men, they wiped out his entire family, his wife, his children. They left no one alive, or so they thought. A cold dread began to seep into Lily's bones. Croft is looking for something, Kane continued. The original treaty, the proof that the valley belongs to my people. It was lost the night my mentor was killed. Croft has been searching for it ever since. He believes it's the key to absolute power in this territory. And you, Lily whispered, are you looking for it too? I'm looking for justice, Kane corrected her. The treaty is paper. Justice is written in blood. His eyes flickered to the locket she now wore openly around her neck. That symbol on your locket. I've seen it before. Lily's heart skipped a beat. Where? It was the family crest of my mentor, Kane said, his voice gentle but his words hitting her like a physical blow. The man Silas Croft murdered. The world tilted. The crackling fire, the cold desert air, the brilliant stars. It all faded into a dizzying rush of confusion. That's not possible, Lily stammered. This was my mother's. She and my father, they were Irish farmers from County Cork. Were they? Kane asked softly. Or is that just the story you were told? Her mind reeled. The wagon accident, her parents' sudden decision to travel west, the hushed, worried conversations she'd overheard but never understood, her mother teaching her strange words she called songs from a forgotten land. The locket, which her mother had pressed into her hand just before they left, telling her to never, ever lose it. It couldn't be true, it was too insane. But as she looked at Kane, at the deadly seriousness in his eyes, she knew he was telling the truth. Her whole life had been a lie. And the man hunting her wasn't just a rich mine owner. He was the man who had murdered her family. Before she could process the horrifying revelation, Kane was suddenly on his feet, his body tense. He kicked dirt over the fire, plunging them into darkness. What is it? Lily whispered, her voice tight with panic. Company, he breathed, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. Get behind the rocks, now! Lily scrambled behind a cluster of boulders, her heart pounding. Kane melted into the shadows, becoming one with the night. She peered out into the darkness and saw them. 3 riders silhouetted against the moonlit ridge. They were moving slowly, methodically, their heads down as if tracking. They weren't a clumsy sheriff's posse. These were professionals, hunters. One of them was the man from the sheriff's office, the man with the scar, Jedediah. Lily pressed herself against the cold stone, trying to make herself small, invisible. The riders were getting closer. She could hear the crunch of their horses' hooves on the gravel. Spread out, Jedediah's voice rasped through the night. He's close. I can smell him. A rock clattered somewhere off to the left. It was a tiny sound, but in the dead quiet of the desert, it was like a cannon shot. 2 of the riders instantly wheeled their horses in that direction, guns drawn. Jedediah, however, didn't move. A slow, cunning smile spread across his face. He'd recognized the sound for what it was. A diversion. He turned his horse in the opposite direction, straight towards the rocks where Lily was hiding. Her breath caught in her throat. He was coming right for her. She was trapped. She looked around desperately, but there was nowhere to run. Jedediah dismounted, pulling a long, wicked-looking knife from his belt. Come on out, little bird, he crooned, his voice dripping with menace. Mr. Croft is so eager to meet you. Lily squeezed her eyes shut, her mind screaming. This was it. After everything she'd survived, she was going to die here, in the dark, at the hands of this monster. Then a sound came from behind Jedediah. Not a gunshot, not a shout, just a single, soft word. Turn. Jedediah froze. He turned slowly, his eyes wide with a flicker of disbelief and fear. Kane was standing there not 10 feet away. He hadn't made a sound. He seemed to have materialized out of the very air. He held no rifle, no weapon she could see. He just stood there, a specter in the moonlight. The two other riders, hearing the voice, came galloping back. They skidded to a halt, their rifles aimed at Kane's chest. Jedediah's fear vanished, replaced by a triumphant sneer. Well, well, Omega. Looks like your ending has come. You and the girl. He gestured with his knife towards the rocks. Kill him. The two riders cocked their rifles, and then Kane moved. He lunged forward, not at the gunman, but at Jedediah. He moved faster than anything Lily had ever seen. In one fluid motion, he snatched the knife from Jedediah's hand, spun him around, and pressed the blade to his throat. It happened so fast the gunmen were still processing it. Drop them, Kane said, his voice lethally calm. The tip of the knife pricked Jedediah's skin, and a single drop of blood welled up. Don't listen to him! Shoot! Jedediah choked out. The gunmen hesitated, their eyes wide. Your choice, Kane said to them. Either your boss dies or you drop the guns. You have 2 seconds. One of the men, his face pale with sweat, let his rifle clatter to the ground. The other, more loyal or more stupid, made a fatal error. He tried to aim. Kane didn't even seem to look at him. With his free hand, he drew his own knife from his belt and threw it. It was a silver blur in the moonlight. The knife spun end over end, striking the gunman in the chest with a sickening thud. He collapsed from his saddle without a sound. The remaining gunman stared in horror, then frantically dropped his rifle and raised his hands high in the air. Smart man, Kane said. He shoved Jedediah away from him. Tell Croft I have the girl, and I have the key. He tapped his own chest. If he wants them, he can come get them himself. Tell him to meet me at the Mission of Lost Souls, at the next full moon. He looked Jedediah dead in the eye. Come alone, or the next blood debt I collect will be his. Jedediah, clutching his bleeding neck, scrambled onto his horse. He gave Kane a look of pure hatred, then spurred his horse and galloped away into the night, the last gunman following close behind. Kane stood for a moment, watching them go. Then he walked over, retrieved his knife from the dead man's chest, and wiped it clean on the man's shirt. He turned to Lily, who was still huddled behind the rocks, trembling. His face was hard, his eyes like chips of flint. Did you hear that? He asked. Lily nodded, unable to speak. Good, he said, because now the hunt is over. He walked to his horse and swung into the saddle. Now, the trap is set. He looked down at her, and the coldness in his expression was more terrifying than anything she had seen that night. Let's go see if a vulture knows how to die. The Mission of Lost Souls was a skeleton bleached white by the sun. It stood alone in a valley of shadows, its bell tower crumbling, its adobe walls scarred by time and violence. Legends said it was haunted, a place where the dead whispered on the wind. It was the perfect place for a reckoning. They arrived 2 days before the full moon, giving them time to prepare. The journey had been tense, the silence between them thick with unspoken questions. Lily's world had been turned upside down. She wasn't an Irish orphan. She was the last survivor of a massacred family, the keeper of a secret she never knew she had, and the target of the most powerful, ruthless man in the territory. And her only protector was a man on a mission of vengeance, a man they called the End. As they explored the crumbling mission, Kane's demeanor changed. He was no longer just a warrior. He was a general surveying a battlefield. He pointed out choke points, hiding places, escape routes. Croft won't come alone, he said, his eyes scanning the broken walls. He's a coward. He'll bring his men, as many as he can. Then this isn't a meeting, Lily said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. It's an ambush. It's a tomb, Kane replied, his voice grim. His, not mine. He began to teach her then, not just to ride, but to fight, not with a gun or a knife. He said there wasn't time, but with her mind. He taught her how to use the terrain, how to create diversions, how to think like a hunter instead of prey. You have a fire in you, Lily O'Connor, he told her one evening as they watched the sun set from the crumbling bell tower. You survived Hartwell. You survived the desert. That fire is your greatest weapon. Don't let fear smother it. As the day of the full moon approached, a strange sense of calm settled over Lily. She was terrified, yes, but she was no longer the helpless girl from the boarding house. She had a name, she had a history, and she had a purpose: to survive, and to see justice done for the family she never knew she'd lost. The night of the full moon, the mission was bathed in an eerie silver light. A single mournful wind whistled through the broken archways. Kane stood in the center of the main chapel, the roof long gone, the moonlight streaming down on him like a spotlight. He was a solitary, defiant figure, waiting for the devil to arrive. Lily was hidden in the shadows of the choir loft above, a pile of rocks next to her, a crude but effective weapon for creating a distraction. They came just after midnight, a dozen riders fanning out to surround the mission. They moved with military precision. At their head was Silas Croft. He was a big man, dressed in a fine black coat, his face framed by a neatly trimmed beard. He looked more like a banker than a killer, but his eyes, cold and gray as a winter storm, held a chilling emptiness. He dismounted and strode into the chapel alone, leaving his men outside. "Kane," Croft's voice was smooth, cultured. "They told me you were dead. A pity they were wrong." "You left a job unfinished, Silas," Kane replied, his voice a low growl. "So it seems," Croft said, his eyes flicking around the ruined chapel. "You've led me on quite a chase, all for a worthless piece of paper. I have the land, I have the power. That treaty is meaningless." "It's not meaningless to the people you slaughtered for it," Kane said. Croft laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Sentiment, a weakness of your people." His eyes narrowed. "You mentioned a girl, the last of that pathetic line. Where is she?" "She's safe," Kane said, "and she has the key." "The key?" Croft's brow furrowed. "What key?" "You thought the treaty was the prize," Kane said, a cold smile touching his lips. "You were wrong. The treaty is just a map. It leads to something much more valuable, something your murdered friends hid before you killed them." Croft's composure finally cracked. A flash of greed and fury crossed his face. "What? What did they hide?" From her hiding place, Lily's mind raced. A key? A map? What was he talking about? Was this part of the trap? "The location is etched inside the locket the girl wears," Kane said. "Give me my justice, and I'll give you the girl, and the locket." Lily's blood ran cold. Betrayal. Was this his plan all along? To use her as bait? To trade her life for his revenge? The hope that had bloomed in her chest withered and died, replaced by an icy despair. She had been a fool to trust him. Croft considered the offer, his greedy eyes gleaming. "A tempting proposition, but I have a better one." He snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the chapel, two of Croft's men appeared, and they weren't alone. They were dragging someone between them. A woman, her hair wild, her clothes torn. It was Martha Hartwell. Lily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. How? Why was she here? "We found her wandering in the desert," Croft said with a cruel smile. "Screaming your name. Seems the little bird's flight left the old crow's cage quite empty. She followed you, all this way." Martha looked up, her eyes wild with a strange mix of hatred and desperation. She saw Kane, and then her eyes found Lily in the choir loft. "You!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "It's all your fault." "Now," Croft said, pulling a pistol and pressing it to Martha's head. "Here is my counteroffer. You give me the girl and the locket, right now, or I'll paint these holy walls with this old woman's brains, and then my dozen men outside will kill you anyway." The world stood still. Kane looked at Croft. He looked at the terrified, pathetic woman who had tormented Lily for years. And then he looked up at Lily. His expression was unreadable. Lily's heart felt like it was going to explode. Her protector was about to trade her. Her tormentor was about to die. And the man who'd murdered her family was going to win. This was the end. And then Martha did something no one expected. She looked at Lily, and the madness in her eyes cleared for just a second, replaced by a flicker of something else. Something that looked like regret. "My girl," Martha whispered, her voice so soft only Croft could hear it. "She had red hair, too, just like hers. He took her from me, a man like you." And with a final desperate surge of strength, She lunged forward, sinking her teeth into Croft's gun hand. Croft screamed in pain and rage. The gun went off, the shot echoing through the chapel like a thunderclap. The bullet struck the stone wall, missing everyone. But in that one crucial moment of chaos, Martha had given them a chance. "Now, Lily!" Kane roared. It was the signal. Lily didn't hesitate. She shoved the pile of rocks over the edge of the loft. They crashed down onto the stone floor below, creating a loud, startling diversion. Croft's men outside, hearing the gunshot and the crash, started pouring into the chapel. But Kane was already moving. He wasn't moving toward Croft. He was running towards a section of the floor Lily hadn't noticed before, a large flat stone with an iron ring set in it. He ripped the stone slab aside, revealing a dark, yawning hole. An old well. "The key isn't the locket, Croft," Kane yelled over the growing chaos. "It's the mission itself. The treasure is down here." Greed, blinding and absolute, consumed Silas Croft. He shoved Martha aside and ran for the well, his men right behind him, all of them desperate to get to the imaginary treasure. He never saw Kane circling around behind them. Croft and his first two men reached the edge of the well and peered down into the darkness. "There's nothing here," Croft snarled, turning around. He turned just in time to see Kane standing behind a crumbling stone pillar at the edge of the well. "You're right," Kane said softly, and he shoved the pillar with all his might. The ancient stone groaned, teetered, and then collapsed, taking the edge of the well and the men standing on it down into the darkness. Their screams were cut short by a final, deep, echoing crash. It was over. The remaining gunmen froze, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. They looked at the gaping hole where their boss had been, then at the silent, deadly man who had just sent him to his grave. Kane stood, breathing heavily, his face grim in the moonlight. He picked up Croft's fallen pistol. He didn't say a word. He just looked at them, and that was enough. They scrambled for their horses and fled into the night, vanishing into the desert. Silence descended on the mission of lost souls. Lily shakily made her way down from the loft. In the center of the chapel, Martha Hartwell was slumped on the floor, a dark stain spreading across the front of her dress. Croft's wild shot hadn't missed everyone after all. Lily rushed to her side. Martha looked up, her breathing shallow. The cruelty was gone from her face, replaced by a weary sadness. "He took my daughter," she wheezed, a bloody froth on her lips. "A man with cold eyes like his. She ran off, never came back. You reminded me of her. The years of abuse, the hatred, the cruelty. It had all been a twisted, poisoned grief. A monster created by another monster." "I'm sorry," Martha whispered, and then her eyes went vacant. Lily stared down at the woman who had been her jailer, her tormentor, and all she felt was a vast, empty pity. Kane walked over to her, his face weary. He knelt beside her. "Some debts," he said softly, "are paid by the wrong people." He looked at Lily, his honey eyes searching her face. "I never would have traded you. The story about the locket, the treasure, it was a lie to bait the trap, to appeal to his greed." Lily just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Tears for her parents, for the life she'd lost, for the broken woman at her feet, and for the man who had walked through hell to bring her to this place. He reached out and gently took the locket in his hand, opening it. "But this," he said, "is no lie." Inside on one half was a tiny, faded portrait of a beautiful woman with kind eyes and Lily's red hair, her mother. On the other side, where Lily had always assumed there was just a smooth silver surface, Kane pressed a small, hidden catch. The silver plate popped open, revealing a second secret compartment underneath. Tucked inside was not a map. It was a tiny folded piece of paper. The treaty. Lily stared at it, her mind unable to grasp the truth. It had been with her all along. Her parents hadn't just been running. They had been guardians. "Your mother was my mentor's sister," Kane said softly. "When Croft came, she and your father escaped with the treaty, and with you, the last of the bloodline. They were trying to get to a safe place when he found them. They hid you in the wreckage before he finished it." He looked at her, his eyes full of a deep, profound respect. The blood of chiefs runs in your veins, Lily O'Connor. You are not an orphan. You are the future of a people. The desert wind howled through the ruined mission, sounding like a chorus of triumphant souls. The moon shone down, bright and full. The Omega had done his work. The debt was paid. The ending had come. But for Lily, standing in the ruins of the past, holding the future in her hands, it felt like a beginning. Lily and Cain buried Martha Hartwell under a lone mesquite tree, marking the spot with a simple cross of stones. There was no justice in her death, only a sad final peace. With the treaty safe, they rode north, away from the blood-soaked desert of Arizona, towards the fertile valleys of the north that were the birthright of their people. Lily, no longer a victim but a leader, rode beside Cain, no longer a vengeful spirit but a guardian. They were two broken souls who had found their purpose in each other. They had a long journey ahead, a new nation to build from the ashes of the old. What do you think? Was Martha's final act one of redemption, or was it just one last desperate grasp for the daughter she had lost? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The line between a monster and a victim is sometimes thinner than we think. If this story of courage, justice, and the discovery of one's true self resonated with you, and you believe that even in the darkest of places, a single spark of hope can start a fire, then I invite you to join our community. Every week, we tell stories about the moments that define us, the choices that change our lives, and the unexpected heroes who rise from the ashes. Hit that subscribe button and become part of a family that knows that sometimes your real story begins only after the world you knew has ended. We'd be honored to have you with us.